Welcome everyone to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Moon Knight episode 1. It is called The Goldfish Problem, and it is an episode 1, so I'll start spoiler free. I'll give you some warning before I do go into any spoilery details. But this is the new Marvel Disney Plus show. I believe it's 6 episodes. It's an event show. Oscar Isaac, Ethan Hawke, 2 big names, and it is a fairly obscure Marvel property. I have heard of Moon Knight, but I have never read a Moon Knight comic to my knowledge. I might have read like an issue 1. They might have relaunched it at one point, and I might have read like one issue of Moon Knight. But I have never really read Moon Knight. I don't really know much about the character. I don't know his history, or if this show was being faithful or unfaithful to the source material. I have no idea. I'm coming at this from the perspective of someone who's effectively a casual, even though I'm really not. I just haven't read Moon Knight. But that is what this is. Honestly, describing and actually sort of giving a premise, I feel it would be spoiling some of it, because the first episode is largely about the mystery of what's actually going on. A lot of the first episode, we're introduced to this character named Stephen, played by Oscar Isaac. He lives in London. He has a job at the museum, and it's him going about his life, and Oscar Isaac's putting on an English accent, which is kind of weird and took me back for a second. But then as it goes on, some weird things start happening. He thinks he like sleepwalks, and he has himself shackled to the bed so that he won't wander off, and he has even more like things like that to sort of see if he has wandered off during the night. He keeps a circle of sand around his bed to see if there's any footprints in it. He puts tape on the doors to see if the door's been opened. It's like really excessive. But that's how much he seems to have this problem with sleepwalking. And as the episode goes on, you kind of learn more, of course, and there's some mystery and teases. To give my thought on the quality here, because I've not been super high on Marvel stuff recently, barring the odd exception. I've been a little bit down on them. I will say that this episode is kind of fresh feeling, because it is very different to most of the MCU stuff. It didn't just feel like the same old thing again, which is kind of nice. I think the fact that it is completely new, unlike something like Loki or Falcon Winter Soldier or even WandaVision, where WandaVision had a lot of mystery, obviously, because of the weird premise that it had, but it was these characters that were coming in from the movies or whatever. Because this gets to just kind of be its own, and I'm sure Moon Knight might tie into something later, but because at least right now this feels like its own little thing, because it's just its own premise with its own storytelling dynamics and techniques and its own, for lack of a better word, gimmicks. It feels fresh and like it's just adhering to itself, and that's honestly quite refreshing when it comes to this Marvel stuff. I didn't feel at any point in this first episode like I was being teased for something that was going to happen in another show or in a movie, or that I didn't understand something because I hadn't watched all of something else that already happened. So those are pluses in my book at this point, because the MCU has gone a bit stale, and I think this is refreshing so far. There is bizarrely one thing that feels similar to another Marvel thing, but it's not an MCU Marvel thing. It's actually one of the Sony Marvel things. They really reminded me of it in one way. So kind of a weird comparison to be made there. And again, I don't know how faithful that is to the comics, but we'll see. Oscar Isaac, of course, is a very good actor. He's very likable in this. Ethan Hawke, who plays the villain, I like him a lot. I was a big fan of a movie called Explorers, directed by Joe Dante, that starred a very young, 12, 13-year-old Ethan Hawke. I was a fan of that as a kid, and obviously as I've grown older, he's been in more and more movies throughout my lifetime, so it's actually kind of weird to see him finally be swooped up into the superhero media empire, because he'd kind of avoided it until now, as far as I can remember anyway. I don't remember Ethan Hawke popping up in anything else that's at least Marvel or DC. Maybe there's something that technically was comic book related, but yeah, so it's kind of interesting seeing him play a villain, because I also don't really see him play a villain too often. He's definitely had some shades of grey roles that I remember. He was in a fantastic movie from the writer of Taxi Driver, which was a lot like Taxi Driver but with a priest, called First Reformed, and that was kind of little shades of grey here or there in that performance, and but ultimately a character who is trying to do the right thing for what he believes in, and I think here, seeing him with the long hair and just sort of having this villainous, almost cult leader presence that he's got going for him is definitely a departure from what I think of with Ethan Hawke. But which that's not a complaint though. It's just an interesting point. So yeah, I think this first episode, because it is episode 1 of a 6-part series, it builds up to kind of finally getting to like what the show really is by the end. But I think it does a decent job of the audience kind of knowing for a long time. I think as the episode goes on and it deals with this idea that this character is doing things that he's not aware of when he's asleep, that we start to get an idea of what some of that other activity might be. And it's quite smart in that it doesn't show you what that other activity is. We just kind of get it from context, and we just get it from the situational awareness and the various factors that have been affected by whatever is happening when he's not aware. So it puts us in the main character's shoes because we're not seeing what he's not seeing. But I think we're a little bit ahead of the main character in maybe figuring some of it out. Perhaps just because it's the nature of it's a TV show versus if you were really going through this in real life, you probably wouldn't leap to some fantastical ideas like you perhaps do when you're watching a TV show. But if I have any critique of how it handles any of this, is that the main character of Steven does come across a little stupid at one particular section of the episode. There's a moment where, and this is not a spoilery, I don't think. There's a moment where he comes back after one of these times where he wakes up in his bed and clearly some things have been happening whilst he's been asleep that he's not seen. And there's a reveal that it's actually been a couple of days. He becomes aware when he goes to meet someone that it's actually Sunday when he thought it was Friday. So he's missing 2 days. And I got a little frustrated with him in this moment because he's looked at his phone multiple times. He spent hours throughout the day. He was watching TV. I find it really hard to believe that he did not notice that it was actually Sunday. I also didn't understand exactly how his job, because there's a lot of stuff early on that his boss is mad at him for being late and he's rushing to his work at the museum. It did occur to me that, wait, if you're missing 2 days, how did work go on Friday, for example? I assume he was working on Friday. I mean, maybe not. Maybe Friday, Saturday were his 2 days off, so maybe it didn't affect anything. I don't know, but it came across a little bit weird to me, like a little oversight. But admittedly, these are relatively nitpicky things, though. I don't think these are huge problems in the grand scheme of things. It's just the sort of thing where I kind of start to think of the minutia of how this is working. Because I think when a premise is like this, and it's playing with the rules of perception and things happening when he's not aware, and then using those context clues to kind of fill in what some of that story is part of the mystery, that is a great idea. But when you're in that mindset and you're looking for clues and you're thinking about the details, you think about these little things that maybe don't quite add up, or just a little bit contrived just so that he doesn't realize until it'll be the funniest possible moment for him not to realize. But it's already nighttime by that point, and it feels like he didn't notice it was Sunday all day. So, like, it, not a big deal really, but it's also something that I think it sticks out to me a little bit when I'm watching it. But yeah, the mystery is kind of good. There is some, of course, CG here or there. I think some of it is a nice design, but there are some CG stuff towards the end that I thought was a little bit goofy looking, which isn't really to rag on it for being a TV show. Honestly, the Marvel movies CG has not been that great for a while, so it is kind of in line for the rest of the universe, to be honest. But I kind of enjoyed it. I kind of enjoyed it. It's definitely the most I've enjoyed, I think, one of these first episodes of one of these shows. Maybe since, because I really liked the WandaVision when it started. WandaVision went off the rails a bit in the last couple episodes, but I did really like the start of that show. Whereas some of the other shows were a little bit more in the middle to kind of when they started up. This one I feel a bit more positive about and a bit more intrigued by what it's doing. Even if it's still got some sort of cheesy kind of Hollywood style moments in it, It feels like it's doing a very different thing, and because it's so tied to Egypt, you know, the museum is putting on an Egypt display, and it very much feels like foreshadowing. The villain talks a little bit an Egyptian god. Clearly, I don't know much about Moon Knight, but I do know that it's tied, like the powers or the heritage of the character is tied in some way to ancient Egypt mythology, and that's cool. So obviously that's all foreshadowing. But I think having that instantly gives it again a different kind of vibe, because it was making me think, oh, this is kind of like a dark superhero thing mixed with like the Mummy or something. Like I was getting this crossover, and it was just nice because so many of other superhero Marvel movies kind of cross over with the same few things. You either have the big space stuff, which Thor kind of crosses over into, as well as Guardians of the Galaxies, and even Infinity War and the Thanos stuff kind of falls into that. Alien Invasions and Avengers falls into that. And then you get the more quote-unquote spy or grounded stuff, which is your Winter Soldier, Black Widow, yada, yada, yada. So a lot of stuff feels like it's kind of following the same few core ideas. This, it kind of feels like, oh, it may just be pulling some things from this more adventure genre, this sort of mythology-inspired adventure sort of movies, but that's actually quite different, and I don't get a lot of that. It's not something we see constantly in movies right now, so if it can have some fun with that, I'm kind of cool with it. So I think I actually have to give a spoiler warning here, just so I can talk about the rest of the first episode, because unlike a lot of first episodes, I feel like this one does hide some stuff and then reveals, I mean, admittedly, maybe everything I'm about to talk about was in the trailer, because I don't remember the trailer, and in that case, it's not really that big a deal, but regardless, I'm giving you the spoiler warning for episode 1 of Moon Knight. You've been warned. So the big thing, so it made me think of Venom, right? That was the big thing, is that when Oscar Isaac's character Steven, when he wakes up in another country, and this voice starts talking to him, it's not doing the same monstrous voice, but that deep like quality, that bass of the voice is still very similar to Venom, I think. And it was hard not to think of Tom Hardy hearing Venom. It was really hard not to. The interesting caveat in this, though, is that the setup in the show, as far as I can tell thus far, is that there's two personalities, and the other personality is up in the one moving around and doing stuff. That's the Mark personality, who has an American accent, who has Oscar Isaac's natural accent. We see him in the reflections later in the episode telling him, you know, give me control, I can get us out of this jam that we're in. You're about to die, let me save us. The idea that they're sharing the one body, and Steven just had no idea. That's not the voice he hears, though. The voice he hears that is talking to him, that sounds like the Venom voice, or kind of like the Venom voice, is a third party. That's almost like there's a symbiote like Venom, but he's like in cahoots with the other personality who works with this voice. This, you know, I presume something passed down from ancient Egypt that is now inside him, and the other personality works with them. That's what I was getting from this first episode. Obviously, I assume this is going to be expanded upon in further episodes, but that was definitely an interesting dynamic, because when he does wake up in this other country and he tries to blend in, there's guys with guns chasing him, and eventually he runs into Ethan Hawke, who's judging people. He's got like a tattoo with scales on it. It's judging if people are good or bad, and this woman dies because the scales said she wasn't good. He has this moment where he runs into him, and they realize that he's this guy they're looking for, and Steven's got this scarab beetle in his pocket, and he tries to give it back, but it's like this other personality, or the Venom entity, the Moon Knight entity, if you want to call him that, is like stopping him, right? So it's like all this almost like body comedy where he's pulling his own arm away and not letting him hand it over, because Oscar Isaac here, Steven, he just wants to hand it over, and he's scared. He's scared shitless. He can't fight. And this is where it starts to play with the idea that the other personality, Mark, takes over, and we don't see what happens when he takes over. We just sort of cut forward in time, and all of the people around him are lying on the floor, and they're bloody, and Steven's got blood on his hands as if he's been beating the shit out of them. So it kind of sets up all these action sequences that don't actually play out, and we get this pretty fun chase sequence where he takes a cupcake van and rides around the hillside, and there's some fun moments where the personality takes over, and all of a sudden he's holding a gun. What I think my favorite thing about all this probably was the fact that the voice that's talking to him is annoyed that he's dealing with Steven and not the other guy. He's annoyed that he's not speaking to Mark. So he keeps saying things like, oh, this asshole's back in control. Oh, this dude, oh, he's going to get us killed. He's very critical of Steven and really doesn't want to deal with them. And there's one moment where Steven just throws the gun that he's holding at the other car, and you just hear the voice go, did he really just throw the gun? But what's great about it is that he's mostly not talking to Steven, he's talking to Mark. Can Mark still hear and understand him when he's not in control? Maybe he can, I don't know, but that's the way he's talking though. So he's just giving this critical commentary, which did make it feel a little fresh and gave it a bit of humor and fun. That was interesting. It was different. I got a little bit of if anyone saw the movie Upgrade, where Logan Marshall Green, who people say looks like Tom Hardy, and he kind of does, not to tie it to the Venom comparison, but Logan Marshall Green gets like an implant after he loses the use of his legs, and they give him this implant that like takes control of his body. It can make his legs move again. And basically when he gets into fights, his body is able to like defend himself without him really being in control. So it kind of has this interesting look to it where he is reacting to all the crazy stuff his own body is doing. And it's got some impressive and eventful. Well, they are eventful, but inventive is the word I was looking for. They've got inventive action sequences in Upgrade because of that. And I was getting like almost some vibes of that in a way, between the voice reacting to Steven being useless and then Steven waking up like mid-drive to then see bodies around him or blood in his hands or holding a gun or the other cars like swerving off the road, and it all bubbles up to when the logging truck. There's a few tropes in here which I think are probably intentional, but I did laugh that both a logging truck and a truck full of chickens are on this road, because those are classic movie car chase tropes. That those are the things that you might hit that'll cause complete chaos, because there's going to be chickens flying everywhere or logs rolling down the hills or whatever. So I got a chuckle out of those. Intentional perhaps, I'm not sure. I'm not 100% convinced, but yeah. But then he wakes up as if it was a dream, and then he's missed 2 days and starts to find stuff in his apartment that implies that there is another personality. There's a phone hidden behind like a panel on the wall, I think it was. And eventually Mark tries to speak to him through the reflections, and it doesn't really work, but he starts seeing, I guess it's the Moon Knight spirit or the entity that talks to him. Like he starts seeing that occasionally. It's like a horror movie almost. And those are all right moments. And I think they're played just enough that you get the horror movie inspiration of them without, I think, being annoyed that they're kind of toothless as horror movie segments, if that makes sense. But yeah, Ethan Hawke shows up at his work, and of course he's freaking out because he's like, wait, that was real? That wasn't a dream? And then he gets read with the scales. Ethan Hawke takes his hands and does the reading, and it's like, you have chaos. And he freaks out. He's like, he has chaos in him. Like, this is bad. Like, he recognizes something inside him. Whether or not he knows it specifically as the Moon Knight entity or something else. But yeah, so the big finale of the episode is that this monster of some kind, this Egyptian monster, it was CG. I think it was maybe a big dog or a big kind of wolf-like thing, but it's chasing him around the museum, and Mark in the reflection says, let me take over, let me save us. So we see kind of like the fabric of the Moon Knight costume start to appear over him. We cut away, and then when we cut, the camera comes back in at the end. He's in full costume, he's punching out the monster, and we get the reveal of what the Moon Knight outfit looks like. I will say, I thought this looked a bit weird to me. It almost looked like maybe the cape was CG or something, because as the camera was coming in, it looked a little bit fake in a way that I don't think it should have looked fake. So I don't know if that was just like the way it was shot or some filters they've got going on that made it look a bit off, but it felt a bit weird. But the Moon Knight outfit is a cool outfit though, just in general, and they look like they've stayed faithful enough to the design, I would say, just from the images that I've seen of the comic. But yeah, so I mean, it makes sense to end here. It makes sense that you spend the episode looking at it from the perspective of Steven. I wonder though, I imagine we're going to spend more time seeing Mark's side of things though, now that we've properly revealed this and he's properly giving permission to take over. It wouldn't surprise me if we get a full episode from Mark's perspective at one point, because that seems like a smart like narrative counterbalance to do that. But Arthur the villain, played by Ethan Hawke, he's got an interesting kind of thing. He's one of those villains who thinks he's doing everything for the right reasons, and that the god that he is trying to release, like, if she had been free in the world, then things like, Hitler would never have done all the things he did. She would have taken care of that. But it's also very, like, plucking out people who have never done anything wrong, but the magic says that they are corrupt in some way, so we just kill them now because they might do something later. There's a little bit of that going on. But he believes what he's doing and all that. It's not super deep as of yet, and honestly, Marvel villains don't tend to get very deep. Ethan Hawke does have some presence though, which at least gives him a bit of a vibe when he's walking around. I think having him show up at regular average Joe Stephen's workplace and Stephen freaking out is a really effective sequence to show that things are getting real and that he's going into that deep end that he doesn't quite understand. I think those feelings get across really well. I do reckon the voice actor actually who plays Khonshu, the voice, F. Murray Abraham. He's an old time actor. He's not just because he's old, but I've seen him in stuff dating back decades. So it's just I never recognized the voice when I was watching it, but when I looked at the name and I recognized the name, I was like, oh, it's him. So good for him, still doing some work. But honestly, it's kind of an interesting premise so far. Like I say, there's a little bit of the Venom comparison. I was kind of feeling that when the voice started talking to him, but I do like the idea of like there being three entities here, two personalities, and then the Moon Knight kind of, or the Khonshu, I guess that's what it is, the Khonshu voice, and that one of the personalities is a relatively good working relationship with Khonshu, but the other one doesn't, and doesn't even know he exists. And Khonshu's like, oh, F this guy, like I have to deal with this asshole. So I'm sure I'll explore more how this came to be and the specifics of it. But for our first episode, it was kind of an intriguing mystery. I think my concern going forward would be, okay, once they've settled this a little bit and we're into, there's a bad guy who needs to be stopped, at that point, does it become a bit more generic as it goes forward? But at least right now, I would say that it's one of the more unique things the MCU is offered us. And I'd say give it a try. Even if you're kind of tired of the typical MCU stuff, I was definitely far more into this than I was any of, barring Spider-Man, like the last like several movies, I have just been like so not into at all. They've bored the tears out of me. This was a bit more entertaining, bit more interesting. Not without some faults, and not without the possibility of it becoming just more generic as it goes on, as it becomes good guy versus bad guy, but at least right now, like I enjoyed how it revealed throughout the episode and Stephen's realization of everything that was going on. And I think the audience been able to kind of figure that out as it was like leaving these breadcrumbs and us understanding, oh, there's another personality as well. Because I think when you first hear the voice, you're like, oh, that's the thing that gets up and walks around when he's not aware of it. But no, like there's another entity, and I think the realization of that made it a lot of fun for me. So yeah, decent first episode. Some good stuff in there. So let me know what you thought of the first episode of Moon Knight in the comments. You can like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications and all that stuff. You can get us on the Twitters at mail_fuzz for channel updates, and of course you can support everything we do over at patreon.com/mailfuzztv for as little as $1 per month and get some bonuses for your trouble. And check out Mailfuzz Movies, of course, where the long form movie podcasts go up for horror movies and sci-fi movies especially. So thank you once again for watching and listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?